Clara Ashford pointed straight at him in front of the entire boardroom and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Get this man out of my building. I don't have time to deal with maintenance staff who think they belong in executive meetings." Ethan Cole didn't flinch. He stood there in his faded navy jacket, holding a folder of documents, and said nothing. Around him, a dozen suits shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. She didn't know his name. After 11 years, the CEO of Ashford Dynamics still didn't know his name, and she was about to find out exactly who she had just humiliated. If this story already has your attention, hit that like button, drop your city and country in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss what happens next. Stories like this one don't come around often. Now, let's get into it. The parking lot at Ashford Dynamics was the kind of place that told you everything about a company's priorities without anyone having to say a word. Closest to the building entrance were 12 reserved spots, each one marked with a small placard bearing a name and a title. Chief Financial Officer, Vice President of Operations, Senior Director of Strategic Acquisitions. The spaces were wide, freshly painted, and shaded by a concrete canopy that someone had spent real money on. Then further back, past the decorative hedges and the two-tier visitor section, was the general employee lot. Cracked asphalt. No shade. Standing water near the drainage grate that never seemed to fully dry, even in summer. Ethan Cole parked in the same spot he always did. Third row, far left, next to the rusted bicycle rack that nobody used anymore. His car was a 2009 Civic with a dented rear bumper and a cracked passenger mirror he'd been meaning to replace for 8 months. He got out, adjusted the strap of the canvas bag on his shoulder, and looked up at the building. 42 stories of glass and steel, the Ashford Dynamics headquarters stood in the center of downtown Harwick like a monument to a certain kind of ambition, the kind that announced itself loudly, the kind that needed people to see it. Ethan zipped his jacket, the navy one he'd bought 4 years ago at a department store closeout sale, and walked toward the entrance. The lobby receptionist, a young woman named Priya, who had started 8 months ago, smiled when she saw him. "Morning, Mr. Cole." "Morning." He stopped. "You cut your hair." She touched the side of her head self-consciously. "Yeah, last week. Nobody noticed." "Looks good," he said, and meant it. He badged through the turnstile and took the elevator to the 4th floor. Not the executive suites on 38. Not the conference rooms on 22. The 4th floor where the technical development teams sat in open-plan clusters surrounded by whiteboards, equipment racks, cable management systems, and the particular brand of organized chaos that lived in every functional engineering department he had ever known. His desk was in the corner, near the window that faced the parking structure rather than the skyline. It was a deliberate choice. He didn't need the skyline. He set his bag down, opened his laptop, and got to work. His name badge said Ethan Cole, Technical Systems. No title beyond that. Most people on the floor assumed he was in maintenance or infrastructure support. He dressed the way a person dressed when they had stopped caring what clothes communicated. Plain shirts, dark pants, comfortable shoes. The kind of watch that told time and nothing else. He had been at Ashford Dynamics for 11 years. In that time, he had eaten lunch alone more often than not. He didn't go to happy hours. He didn't participate in the fantasy football pool or the birthday card rotations. He said good morning to people and remembered their names, and that was about as far as the social architecture of the office extended for him. People had theories. "He's one of those guys who just floated up through the IT department and never left," said Derek Holt, a mid-level project manager who had been at the company 3 years and already spoke with the authority of someone who'd founded it. "You know the type, shows up, does whatever, collects a check." "I heard he used to be some kind of engineer," said Tamsin Park, who handled vendor relations on the 3rd floor. "Like actual engineering, but he had some kind of breakdown or burnout thing, and now he just maintains systems." "Honestly, he gives me weird vibes," Derek said. Nobody asked Ethan directly, because nobody thought his story was interesting enough to ask about. He had a 7-year-old daughter named Lily. She had her mother's eyes, which was something Ethan had learned to notice without letting it steer him somewhere dark. Her mother, Rachel, had left when Lily was 14 months old. Not because she was a bad person. Ethan had spent a long time being angry and a longer time accepting that she simply hadn't wanted the life that had materialized around her. She'd signed over full custody without a fight. She sent a card on Lily's birthday most years. That was the extent of it. Ethan raised Lily alone. He dropped her at school every morning at 7:50 and picked her up at 5:30 from the aftercare program. On days when he had to work late, which happened more than he liked to admit, he had an arrangement with his neighbor Dolores, a retired teacher who brought Lily home and fed her dinner and never made him feel guilty about it, though he always did anyway. Lily knew her father worked with computers at a big building. She had once visited the office on a Take Your Child to Work day 3 years ago and pronounced it kind of boring, but the snacks were good. She was, in Ethan's honest assessment, the most interesting person he had ever met, and he was aware that was a strange thing for a parent to think about a 7-year-old, but he thought it anyway. He had a framed drawing she'd made on his desk, a crayon rendering of the two of them standing in front of what appeared to be either a house or a very square mountain. He wasn't sure which, and he hadn't asked because he liked not knowing. The email arrived at 9:14 on a Tuesday morning in late October. It was from the office of Clara Ashford, CEO, and it was addressed to all senior technical and project staff regarding an emergency review meeting scheduled for 10:30 in the 41st floor conference suite. The subject line read, Strategic Acquisition Review, Mandatory Attendance. Ethan read it twice. Then he opened a different folder on his desktop, one that wasn't connected to the company server, one that lived on an encrypted drive he had carried with him since long before the current administration, and he read through some documents he had been compiling for the past 6 weeks. He sat very still for a moment. Then he picked up his coffee, drank the last of it, and started getting ready to go upstairs. It wasn't on the original attendee list. He found that out when he got to the elevator bank, and Marcus Ashford stepped in beside him. Marcus was 41, tall, and had the particular quality of handsomeness that had probably opened a lot of doors for him early in life and taught him nothing useful in return. He was Clara's younger cousin, and his formal title was Senior Vice President of Corporate Development, though his actual function at the company was considerably harder to define. Marcus looked at Ethan the way people look at someone they don't quite recognize but feel they should probably place. "You going to the 41st floor meeting?" Marcus asked. "Yes." Marcus's expression settled into something that wasn't quite a frown. "That's a senior staff meeting. Invite only." "I'm aware. I don't think I've seen you in the senior meetings before." "No," Ethan said. "You haven't." The elevator doors opened on 41, and they both stepped out. Marcus glanced back once, then moved ahead toward the conference suite where assistants were arranging water glasses and setting up presentation displays. Ethan found a seat near the back wall. He set his canvas bag beside his chair and pulled out a manila folder. He did not open his laptop. He did not check his phone. He waited. Clara Ashford arrived at 10:32. She was 53, with the kind of posture that came from decades of rooms paying attention when she walked into them. Her hair was silver-streaked and pulled back precisely. She wore a charcoal blazer and no jewelry, except a watch that, unlike Ethan's, communicated quite a lot. She had inherited the CEO position from her father, Bernard Ashford, 8 years ago following his cardiac event. Bernard had not been a perfect man. Few people who build significant companies are, but he had possessed a particular quality that Clara had never fully absorbed. He had paid attention to the details of the work itself, not just the business built around it. Clara was intelligent, thorough, and genuinely committed to the company's success. Ethan had never doubted that. What she lacked was depth in the technical architecture that the company's actual value rested on, and she compensated for that gap by surrounding herself with people she trusted to translate it for her. Unfortunately, one of those people was Marcus. She stood at the head of the table and pulled up the presentation on the screen behind her. "Thank you all for adjusting your schedules on short notice," she said. "I'll be brief. We've been approached by Veltrin Capital regarding a joint acquisition of Meridian Tech Systems. The valuation is favorable, the timing aligns with our Q2 targets, and I've asked Marcus to walk us through the preliminary framework." Marcus stood, buttoned his jacket, and clicked to the first slide. Ethan watched him. He watched the numbers. He watched the way certain line items had been structured on the financial projections, the ones that looked clean from a distance but fell apart under examination. He had been watching this particular arrangement develop for 6 weeks. "Any questions before we move to the vote?" Clara looked around the table. The room was quiet in the way rooms get quiet, when people sense that the decision has already been made and the meeting is a formality. Ethan raised his hand. Clara's gaze moved to the back of the room and stalled. She looked at him with the particular blankness of someone encountering something unexpected. I'm sorry, are you in the right room? There was a short, awkward pause. Yes, Ethan said. This is a senior executive strategy meeting. I don't recognize you from the senior team. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm in technical systems. Someone at the table, he thought it was Derek Holt, who had apparently moved up in the world, actually let out a short laugh. Not malicious exactly, just reflexive. The laugh of someone who has identified an absurdity. Marcus cleared his throat. I think there may have been an error with the invitation distribution. This gentleman is from the infrastructure team. He said infrastructure the way some people say janitorial. Not with contempt exactly, with a kind of casual indifference that was somehow worse. Clara looked at her assistant, Helen, who looked at her tablet and shook her head slightly. Mr. Cole, Clara said, and her voice had shifted into the register of someone who is being patient about something that is testing their patience. I don't know how you received the invite for this meeting, but I need to ask you to— The Meridian acquisition is structured to fail, Ethan said. The room went very still. I beg your pardon? The valuation Veltrin is offering is based on Meridian's proprietary signal compression framework. That framework infringes on 3 patents that Ashford Dynamics filed 11 years ago. If this acquisition goes through, we absorb the liability. The moment Veltrin's legal team triggers a dispute, and they will because they've already run discovery on those patents, we're looking at a reversal that could cost the company between $40 and $70 million in remediation and penalties, depending on how the joint liability clause in the acquisition agreement is structured. Silence. Then Marcus laughed. It was the kind of laugh that was meant to settle a room, to signal that the appropriate response to what had just been said was amusement. This is— He shook his head. Clara, I apologize. I don't know how this person got into the building, let alone this room. I badged in at the main entrance, Ethan said. Same as everyone. What I mean— Marcus's voice tightened, is that this isn't the appropriate venue for someone in your position to be— What's my position? Marcus stopped. I'd like to know what you think my position is, Ethan said. Not aggressively, just clearly. Since you've referenced it twice. Clara cut across both of them. Mr. Cole, I don't doubt that you have some concerns, and I'm sure the appropriate channel would be— I tried the appropriate channel, Ethan said. 6 weeks ago, I filed a technical risk assessment with the Corporate Development Office. 2 weeks ago, I was told the filing had not been received. Last week, I filed a second report directly with the compliance officer. I was contacted by HR the following morning and told that I had been flagged for overstepping the boundaries of my role. Another silence. A different quality. I'm not trying to overstep anything, Ethan said. I'm trying to tell you that this deal is built on a structure that will hurt this company and that the people who put it together either don't understand what they're looking at or don't care. He looked at Marcus when he said the last part. Marcus looked back at him with an expression that had stopped being amused. Clara set her hands flat on the table. Mr. Cole, I appreciate that you feel strongly about this, but you are a technical systems employee. You are not a patent attorney. You are not a member of the corporate development team, and you are not, with respect, in a position to evaluate the strategic frameworks being discussed in this room. She paused. I'm going to ask you once, politely, to gather your things and let us continue. Ethan looked at her. He thought about Lily, for a reason he couldn't entirely explain. He thought about her crayon drawing on his desk. He thought about the folder in his canvas bag. Not the manila folder he'd carried up, but the other one, the one he hadn't opened yet. The one he'd been sitting on for 11 years because there had never been a reason to open it before. He thought about the reason he had come here 11 years ago, and what he had built, and what he had walked away from, and what it had cost him, and what it was going to cost everyone in this room if this deal went through. He picked up the manila folder. Before I go, he said, I want to leave this with you. It's the patent documentation, registration numbers, filing dates, technical overlap analysis. I had it verified by an independent IP attorney 3 weeks ago. He set it on the table in front of the nearest person, who passed it down toward Clara with the careful movements of someone handling something they hadn't been asked to touch. You don't have to read it now, but I'd ask that you read it before you vote. He picked up his bag and walked toward the door. Mr. Cole. He stopped. Clara's voice had a different edge now. Not softer, but more careful. How do you know this much about the patent filings? He turned back. Because I wrote them, he said. The original technical documentation, 11 years ago. Then he walked out and took the elevator back to the 4th floor. He got back to his desk and sat down and stared at his screen for a long moment. His hands were completely steady, which surprised him. He had thought they might shake. On his desk, Lily's crayon drawing caught the thin October light coming through the parking structure window. The house, or the mountain. He still didn't know which. His phone buzzed. A text from Dolores. Lily lost another tooth. She is very pleased with herself and wants you to call. He smiled without meaning to. He typed back, tell her I'll call at lunch. Tell her she's destroying me financially. 3 dots appeared, then, she says good. He set the phone down and opened the encrypted drive. He had not planned for this to happen today. He had hoped, as he had hoped for the past 6 weeks, that the channels would work, that the compliance structure would function the way it was supposed to function, that he could stay in his corner by the parking structure window and let the company run itself and just be the person who made sure the systems kept working. He had hoped for a long time that he would never need to open the folder that Walter Kingsley had given him. He stared at it now. Then he picked up his desk phone and dialed a number he had not called in 4 years. It rang twice. Walter, he said, it's Ethan. I think it's time. Walter Kingsley answered on the second ring, which told Ethan something. Walter was 71 years old and had spent the last 4 years in a house on the Connecticut shoreline doing whatever retired chairmen of technology companies did with their time, gardening, Ethan suspected, based on the one Christmas card he'd received with a photograph of Walter standing next to a very large tomato plant with the expression of a man who had won something significant. Walter did not answer his phone quickly. He screened. He evaluated. The fact that he picked up on the second ring meant he had been waiting for this call. I wondered when you'd get around to it, Walter said. Longer than you expected? About 3 weeks longer. There was the sound of a chair, something settling. What happened? They're moving on Meridian. The vote was supposed to happen this morning. Was supposed to. I walked into the meeting. A pause. How'd that go? About how you'd expect. Walter made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Did she know who you were? No. Does she now? She knows I wrote the original patent documentation. I don't think she knows what that means yet. It'll land, Walter said. Give it a few hours. People like Clara, they hear something that doesn't fit the picture they've built, and they need time for the frame to crack before they can see what's actually in it. Another pause. You still have the envelope I gave you? Yes. Don't open it yet. Don't show anyone yet. You'll know when. Walter, I mean it, Ethan. Not yet. The moment you show that, the whole conversation shifts from what they did wrong to who you are. Let them stay focused on what they did wrong a little longer. Ethan didn't answer immediately. I was looking at the encrypted drive on his desk. Marcus has been moving money, he said. Not obviously. It's layered through 3 vendor contracts and a consulting agreement with a firm that I can't find any physical address for. The disbursement started 14 months ago. Silence on Walter's end. The kind of silence that meant he was processing rather than waiting. How much? Walter asked. Over 14 months, best I can calculate from what I can see. Somewhere between 8 and 11 million. But I'm working from the fragments I've been able to pull from accessible financial records. The full picture is behind access levels I don't have. You need someone inside the finance department. I need someone who won't go straight to Marcus. Do you know anyone on the finance team? Ethan thought for a moment. There's a woman named Soo Jin Park. She's a mid-level financial analyst. She's been at the company 7 years. She flagged an anomaly in the Q3 vendor reports 2 months ago and was reassigned to a different project within a week. He paused. I think she saw something. Can you reach her without it getting back to Marcus? I don't know, maybe. Find out, Walter said. Carefully. He paused again. And Ethan, I'm going to make some calls of my own. There are people on the board who trusted me for a long time. Some of them still do. I want to know what Marcus has been telling them. Be careful with that. If Marcus finds out you're asking questions. Marcus Ashford has been careful his whole life, and look where it's gotten him, Walter said.
and this time it was a laugh, short and dry. "I'll be in touch." The line went quiet. Ethan set the phone down and sat for a moment looking at the parking structure through his window. A pigeon had landed on the concrete barrier outside and was doing what pigeons do, which is move around with complete confidence in environments they have no business being in. He thought about Sujin Park. He had spoken to her exactly 3 times in 7 years. Once in the elevator, once at a department-wide meeting about benefits changes, and once when she had stopped him in the hallway near the 4th-floor copy room to ask whether the network slowdown affecting the finance cluster was a known issue. He had told her it would be resolved by end of day. It was. She had remembered, because 2 days later she had sent him a brief email. "Thank you for fixing that. It was driving me crazy." He had responded, "No problem." That was the extent of their professional relationship. He was going to have to do better than that. He found her at 12:15 in the building's smaller cafeteria on the 2nd floor, the one that served actual food rather than the grab-and-go options on the main level. She was sitting alone at a corner table with a container of soup and a tablet propped against her water bottle, reading something with the focused attention of someone who preferred eating alone and had arranged things accordingly. Ethan bought a coffee he didn't particularly want and walked over. "Mind if I sit here?" he asked. She looked up, took him in. The blank half-second of non-recognition, then something clicked. "Technical systems, right? You fixed the network thing last year." "Ethan Cole." Jin. She gestured at the chair across from her in a way that was neither warm nor unwelcoming, just practical. "Sure." He sat. He didn't launch into it immediately, because he had learned a long time ago that the fastest way to make someone defensive was to come at them with urgency before they'd had time to decide you weren't a threat. He drank his coffee. She ate her soup. 30 seconds passed. "The reassignment you got 2 months ago," he said. "Was it voluntary?" She set her spoon down. The expression on her face shifted in a way that told him everything he needed to know about whether she had seen something. People who hadn't seen anything looked confused when you asked a question like that. People who had seen something looked briefly, unmistakably afraid. "What are you talking about?" she said. "I'm not from HR," he said. "I'm not from compliance. I'm not connected to Marcus Ashford in any professional or personal capacity. I'm a technical systems employee who has been spending his evenings for the past 6 weeks pulling fragments from accessible financial records and building a picture that I think you have better pieces of than I do." She stared at him. "You walked in here and said that to a person you've spoken to 3 times. 2.5. The elevator one barely counted." She didn't smile, but something in her posture changed. Not relaxing exactly, but reorganizing. "Who sent you?" "Nobody. I'm here because I think you got moved off a project because someone realized you were too good at your job." A long pause. "That's a very specific thing to say." "You flagged an anomaly in the Q3 vendor reports. 2 weeks later, you were reassigned to compliance documentation review. In 7 years at this company, you hadn't touched compliance documentation once." She looked at her soup. Her jaw was tight. "I was told my skills were needed in a different area." "Who told you that?" She didn't answer. "Was it Marcus's office?" Still nothing. But she hadn't picked up her spoon. "I'm not asking you to do anything," Ethan said. "I'm not asking you to take any risk. I'm telling you that what you saw, whatever it was, I think I've been seeing pieces of the same thing from a different angle. And I think the company is about to make a very expensive mistake because nobody with enough standing to stop it is saying anything clearly enough." She looked up. "And you have standing?" "Not in any way that would make sense to you right now," he said. "But yes." Another long pause. She picked up her spoon, then set it down again. "The anomaly I flagged," she said slowly, carefully, in the voice of someone testing the temperature of water before stepping in. "It was in the vendor disbursements. There was a consulting firm, Verato Partners. They've been receiving quarterly payments, significant ones. But there's no procurement record for them, no contract in the vendor management system, no deliverable documentation, nothing." She paused. "Normally, an anomaly like that would go to the internal audit team. I filed it. 2 weeks later, I got the reassignment." "Did anyone follow up on your filing?" "I got a form email saying the matter had been reviewed and resolved." "From who?" "The signature was from the internal audit director, but the email address was formatted wrong. It came through a slightly different domain string. I noticed it, but I didn't. She stopped. I didn't know what to do with it. I wasn't sure if I was seeing something or being paranoid. You weren't being paranoid. She looked at him directly for the first time in the conversation. What is Verado Partners? I don't know yet. I've been trying to find a physical address, a registration, any public filing. Nothing I can verify, which means it's either an extremely private operation or it doesn't exist in any legitimate sense. You think it's a shell? I think it's a pipe. She was quiet for a moment. If this is what it looks like, the people involved are not going to be happy about someone digging around. No, Ethan agreed. That's not a reassuring thing to hear from someone who just sat down at my lunch table. I know, I'm sorry about that. She looked at him, genuinely looked at him, in the way people do when they're trying to figure out whether to trust someone and they've run out of indirect methods and have to just decide. What do you need? Whatever documentation you kept, anything that shows the disbursement pattern, the filing you submitted, the email you received, copies, if you made them. I may have made copies, she said carefully. If you did, I'd like to see them, on your timeline, your terms. You don't have to send them through any company system. She picked up her soup spoon again, ate one careful spoonful, then, I'll think about it. It was the most he could have asked for. He stood, picked up his coffee. Thank you for letting me sit. You didn't give me much choice. You could have said no. She almost smiled. Almost. Check your personal email tonight, she said, the one that isn't on the company server. He hadn't told her he had a personal email that wasn't on the company server. He filed that away. Okay, he said. He walked back to the elevator with his coffee and the quiet, measured awareness that he had just involved someone else in something that had the potential to go very wrong, and that the distance between what he was doing now and what he was going to have to do next was shrinking in a way he could feel but couldn't yet fully see. The email from HR arrived at 3:47 that afternoon. It was addressed to Ethan Cole, and it was CC'd to his department supervisor, a man named Phil Garrett, who was a decent person in a structural position that didn't allow him much room to be one. The email was brief. It referenced his attendance at that morning's executive meeting and described it as a violation of professional conduct protocols. It noted that his risk assessment filing had been reviewed and found to be outside the scope of his role. It requested that he attend a formal clarification meeting the following morning at 9 a.m. with Phil and a representative from HR. It did not say the words disciplinary action, but the architecture of the email was very clear about what it was. Phil appeared at Ethan's desk 8 minutes later. He was a man who had the permanent expression of someone managing more stress than he had originally signed up for, and this afternoon that expression had intensified. I got the same email you did, Phil said, dropping into the spare chair that nobody ever used except Phil. You want to tell me what happened this morning? I attended a meeting. A senior executive meeting that you weren't invited to. I had information relevant to a decision being made in that meeting. Phil rubbed his face with one hand. Ethan, you can't just... I can't protect you if you're walking into rooms you don't belong in. I know. Do you? Because this email is not nothing. This is HR getting involved. And when HR gets involved for reasons like this, it doesn't... He stopped. He was a decent person. Are you in some kind of trouble? No more than usual. That's not a reassuring answer. I know. Phil looked at him for a moment with the exasperated concern of a man who has been managing this particular quiet, impossible person for 6 years and has never quite figured out what to do with him. The meeting tomorrow at 9, just keep it professional. Don't do anything else between now and then that's going to make it harder to explain. Okay. Phil stood. Is there anything you want to tell me? Ethan thought about this. Not yet, he said, but possibly soon. Phil stared at him. That's incredibly unhelpful. I know. I'm sorry, Phil. After Phil left, Ethan turned back to his screen. He had 3 hours before Lily's aftercare pickup. He used 2 of them, pulling every accessible financial record connected to the Meridian acquisition and cross-referencing them against the patent filing timestamps he had stored on the encrypted drive. The picture that emerged was not subtle once you knew where to look. The Meridian deal was not simply a bad acquisition. It was structured specifically to absorb a legal liability that would trigger at a predetermined point, a point that coincided almost exactly with a private investment position that someone, through a series of intermediary holdings, had taken out against Ashford Dynamics' own valuation. Someone was betting against the company, using the company's own acquisition as the mechanism. It was the kind of thing that took real intelligence to construct. Ethan sat with that for a minute. I didn't enjoy what he felt about it, because what he felt was partly anger and partly something that scared him more than anger. A kind of sad recognition that the company he had built this for, the idea he had given a decade of his life to, had been used as a vehicle for exactly the kind of thinking that he had hoped it would stand against. He packed up his bag at 5:10. He shut down the encrypted drive and locked it in the bottom drawer of his desk. The drawer that required a key he kept on the same ring as his car keys, a detail nobody had ever questioned because nobody had ever thought to look. He drove to the aftercare center on Millfield Street and parked out front. Lily came out in a rush, the way she always did, as though the building had been holding her at some pressure and the doors released it all at once. She was wearing a yellow rain jacket that was slightly too big for her and carrying a paper bag that rustled as she ran. "I made a volcano," she announced, climbing into the back seat. "Did it erupt?" "It was supposed to, but Mitchell put too much baking soda in and it kind of went sideways and got on Mrs. Yamamoto's sleeve." "How did Mrs. Yamamoto take that?" "She was okay. She laughed, but like the kind of laugh where you can tell she's also a little bit tired." Ethan merged onto the main road. "Did you apologize to Mitchell?" "It wasn't my volcano." "Did you say anything to Mrs. Yamamoto?" Lily thought about this. "I told her the baking soda was from the communal supplies, so technically it wasn't Mitchell's fault either." "That's very analytical of you." "She said I had a point." Lily shifted the paper bag onto her lap. "Dad?" "Yeah." "Did something happen at work today?" He glanced in the rearview mirror. She was 7, and she had this quality. He didn't know where it came from, whether it was nature or the particular experience of growing up in a quiet house with a quiet father, of picking up on things that most adults missed. "What makes you ask?" "You're driving the same speed as always, but your shoulders are different." He didn't say anything for a moment. "It's been a complicated day." "Complicated like math hard or complicated like people hard?" "People hard." She nodded with the solemn thoroughness of someone who had been collecting data on this distinction for years. "Those are worse," she said. "Math at least has an answer." "That's very true," Ethan said. They drove the rest of the way home mostly in silence, which was something they were both comfortable with. He made dinner, pasta, the simple kind, the kind Lily would eat without negotiation. And they sat at the small kitchen table and she told him about a book she was reading about a girl who discovered she could communicate with birds. And he listened the way he always listened, with his full attention, because she had given him something he could never quite name, and the least he could do was pay attention. After she went to bed, he sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, his personal one, not the company machine, and opened his email. There was a message from an address he didn't recognize. No subject line. The body of the email contained only an attachment and 3 words, "In case you need it." The attachment was a scanned copy of a financial filing, 23 pages. The disbursement records for Verato Partners going back 18 months, including the original anomaly report that Sujin had filed, and the subsequent email response, header data intact, showing clearly that the response had not originated from the internal audit director's actual account. Someone had spoofed the internal audit director's email to close out a legitimate fraud flag. Ethan read through all 23 pages. Then he read them again. Then he opened a secure document and started building a timeline. He worked for 2 hours. He was not tired, which surprised him because he was almost always tired by 9 in the evening. But there was a particular quality of focus that arrived when a picture started resolving from its fragments, and it pushed through the tiredness like light through thin paper. At 11:12, his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. "Mr. Cole." The voice was male, measured, with the particular flatness of someone who had practiced being unreadable. "My name is Richard Voss. I'm calling on behalf of Marcus Ashford." Ethan said nothing. "Mr. Ashford wants you to understand that the concerns you raised this morning have been heard and will be reviewed through the appropriate internal channels. He also wants you to understand that Ashford Dynamics has a strong commitment to protecting its employees from the stresses of involvement in matters outside their area of professional responsibility." "I appreciate the call," Ethan said.
He also wanted me to convey that there are provisions in your employment contract regarding the use of company technical resources for non-sanctioned research activities that the company would prefer not to have to invoke. Is that a threat? A pause. It's a reminder of provisions that exist. Okay, Ethan said. Tell Marcus I appreciate him thinking of me. The line went dead. Ethan set the phone down on the kitchen table. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at the 23 pages of documentation on his laptop screen. Then he got up and went to the hallway closet, the one where he kept the winter coats and the toolbox and Lily's old roller skates, and on the top shelf behind a shoebox of miscellaneous cables, a sealed envelope that Walter Kingsley had handed him 4 years ago in a parking garage in downtown Harwick, and said, "You'll know when." He reached up and took it down. He held it in both hands. He didn't open it, not yet. But he stood there in the hallway for a long time, holding it, and the house was quiet around him, and from upstairs came the soft, intermittent sounds of a 7-year-old talking in her sleep, something she had done since she was an infant, full conversations with people who existed only in her dreams. And Ethan Cole stood in the hallway of his ordinary house with an envelope that was not ordinary at all, and he understood with the particular clarity that only arrives after a very long time of trying not to understand something that what was coming next was not going to be something he could manage quietly from a corner desk by a parking structure window. The time for quiet was running out. He put the envelope in his canvas bag. He turned off the kitchen light. He checked the locks on the front door and the back. He went upstairs, looked in on Lily. She was flat on her back with her arms spread wide, still talking softly to whoever lived in her sleep. And he stood in her doorway for a moment with his hand on the frame. Then he went to bed. He did not sleep well. But he had not expected to. Part 3, the secret owner revealed. He slept 3 hours, maybe 4. The kind of sleep that doesn't so much rest you as pause you, and when his alarm went off at 6:15, he was already half awake, staring at the ceiling with the particular stillness of a person whose mind had been running while their body pretended otherwise. He made coffee. He made Lily's lunch, peanut butter, apple slices, the small bag of pretzels she liked. He woke her at 6:45 and sat on the edge of her bed while she gradually came back from wherever she went when she slept, which always took longer than it should and involved at least 2 false starts where she announced she was awake and then immediately wasn't. "Dad," she said the third time. "Yeah. My tooth hole feels weird." "That's normal. It'll stop." She sat up. Her hair was doing something complicated on one side. She looked at him with the direct, unguarded attention that children have before the world teaches them to be more careful with it. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." "You look like when you had that bad cold, but you kept saying you were fine." "I'm genuinely fine, just tired." She studied him for another second, then apparently decided to accept this, or at least to move on. "Can I have hot cocoa?" "It's 60 degrees outside." "That's cold. That's fall." "Fine," she said, in the tone of someone making a significant concession. "Can I have the pretzels in my lunch?" "Already packed them." She smiled, and it was the smile of someone who has been given something small and received it like something large. And Ethan took that with him when he drove her to school and all the way across town to the parking lot at Ashford Dynamics, where he pulled into his usual spot by the rusted bike rack and sat in the car for 60 seconds before going in. The canvas bag was on the passenger seat. Inside it, the sealed envelope sat between his laptop and the folder of patent documentation. He left the car. He went inside. The 9 o'clock meeting with HR was in a small conference room on the 7th floor called the Birch Room, which had a name that tried very hard to suggest something calming. The HR representative was a woman named Donna Ferris, who had been at the company for 15 years, and had the quality of someone who has spent a long time learning to be neutral about things that were not neutral. Phil Garrett sat beside her with his coffee and his look of managed distress. There was a third person in the room that Ethan had not expected, a man named Greg Olson, who was introduced as deputy counsel from the legal department. Ethan sat down across from the three of them and put his bag on the floor beside his chair. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Cole," Donna said. "I want to start by saying this is a clarification meeting, not a disciplinary hearing. We're here to discuss yesterday's events and make sure everyone has a clear picture going forward." "Okay," Ethan said. "Can you walk us through your decision to attend the executive strategy meeting yesterday morning?" He walked them through it. calmly, without editorializing. He described the risk assessment filings, the non-receipt responses, the compliance filing, the HR flag, and his decision that the direct approach was the only remaining avenue. He described what he had said in the meeting and what had been said in response. When he finished, Donna looked at Greg Olson. "Mr. Cole," Greg said, "the company's concern is that the activities you've described, independent technical research using company-accessible records, attendance at restricted meetings, direct engagement with executives outside your reporting chain, these constitute conduct outside the boundaries of your professional role. The research I conducted used only records that my access level permitted me to view," Ethan said. "I didn't breach any systems or access any restricted data. The concern isn't about unauthorized access. It's about the use of company time and resources for activities unrelated to your job function. I conducted most of the analysis outside business hours." "Most," Greg repeated. "Some of it was during lunch breaks." Phil shifted slightly in his chair. "Mr. Cole," Greg continued, "I want to be straightforward with you. The company is prepared to handle this as a conduct matter and move forward, provided you're willing to commit to staying within your defined role going forward and refraining from further independent analysis of matters outside your purview. And the Meridian acquisition? That's being handled by the appropriate teams. The same teams that buried my filings?" The temperature in the room dropped a few degrees. "That's a serious allegation," Greg said. "It's a documented sequence of events. I have the filing timestamps, the non-receipt responses, and the reassignment record of a finance analyst who flagged the same anomaly 2 months ago." Donna's neutral expression developed a small crack in it. Phil was now looking at the table. "Mr. Cole," Greg said carefully, "I want to advise you that making unsubstantiated allegations against specific colleagues or departments creates significant legal exposure for, I'm not making unsubstantiated allegations. I have documentation." Ethan reached into his bag and set a folder on the table. Not the patent folder, a different one. "That's the original Q3 anomaly report, the response email with the spoofed header data, and the disbursement records for Verato Partners going back 18 months. I had the header analysis done by an independent IT security consultant yesterday evening." Nobody touched the folder. "The Meridian deal is designed to absorb a liability that will trigger a predetermined legal challenge," Ethan continued. "The challenge is connected to patents this company filed 11 years ago. At the same time, there's an investment position held through intermediary holdings that stands to benefit from the resulting drop in the company's valuation. The Verato disbursements represent the financial bridge between those two things." Greg Olson was looking at the folder now despite himself. "I'd like to know," Ethan said, "whether any of this was part of what the legal department was advising on regarding the Meridian acquisition." The room was very quiet. "This meeting," Greg said finally, "is going in a direction I wasn't briefed for. I'd like to take a recess." "That's fine," Ethan said, "but the shareholder board meeting is in 4 days. Whatever review process you'd like to initiate needs to account for that timeline." He picked up his bag. He left the folder on the table. He walked out of the Birch room and took the elevator back down to 4. By noon, the building felt different. It was a subtle thing, the kind of shift in atmosphere that doesn't announce itself but registers somewhere below conscious thought. People who normally walked past Ethan's desk without looking were looking. Not speaking, just looking. 2 people from the executive floor support team came down to the 4th floor for what appeared to be no reason, spent 10 minutes near the coffee station, and left. Phil hovered in his peripheral vision twice without approaching. At 12:40, Ethan's work extension rang. "This is Clara Ashford." He had not expected that. He had expected another intermediary, another Richard Voss, another carefully worded reminder about contractual provisions, not Clara directly. "Ms. Ashford, I read the patent documentation you left yesterday." A pause. "I had our legal team pull the original filings this morning." He waited. "The filing dates align with what you said. The technical documentation authorship." Another pause, and something in the pause told him she was finding this harder than she'd expected. "It does list your name." "Yes." "Why didn't you ever—" She stopped, started again. "You've been here 11 years. I've been CEO for 8 of those years. In 8 years, you never mentioned—" "I didn't need to," Ethan said. "The work was doing what it was supposed to do. I didn't need credit for it. Silence. He could hear her breathing, not in a distressed way, more in the way of someone reorienting to a changed landscape. The folder you left in the HR meeting this morning. Greg Olson brought it to me an hour ago. I thought he might. The Verado payments. Do you know who controls Verado Partners? Not with certainty, not yet, but the structure of the intermediary chain points somewhere specific. She didn't ask where. He thought she might already know, or at least suspect, and that suspecting was not the same as being ready to say it. Mr. Cole, she said, and her voice had changed. Not softer exactly, but stripped of the professional register she'd used in every interaction he'd watched her have, including the one where she'd told him to leave her boardroom. I owe you an apology for yesterday. You don't know enough yet to know whether you owe me an apology, he said. Wait until you know everything, then decide. Another pause. That's a strange thing to say. Maybe, but I mean it. Will you come to my office this afternoon, 3 o'clock? He thought for a moment. Yes, but I'd like to bring someone. Who? I'll let you know when I'm sure he can make it. He hung up and immediately called Walter. She called me directly, Ethan said. I know, Walter said. I had a conversation this morning with 2 board members. One of them called Clara before noon. She's not entirely in the dark anymore, Ethan. How much do they know? Enough to be worried, not enough to be certain. The board is divided. 3 of them have been getting Marcus's version of events for the past year, and those 3 are still resistant, but the other 4 are listening. There's a board meeting in 4 days? I know. I'm going to be there. Ethan paused. You haven't been in that building in 4 years. No, Walter said, but some things require a person to be in the room. A brief silence. She invited you to her office this afternoon? 3 o'clock. I asked to bring someone. I'll be there. Bought it. He spent the 2 hours between lunch and 3 o'clock doing something he hadn't planned to do until later. He called an attorney. Her name was Patricia Wren, and she had been a corporate IP litigator for 22 years. He had been referred to her by the independent IP attorney he'd used 3 weeks ago for the patent overlap analysis. He had not spoken to her before today. He had hoped he wouldn't need to. She listened to everything he said without interrupting, which was either a very good sign or the sign of someone so experienced with impossible situations that nothing surprised her anymore. The sealed agreement, she said when he'd finished. The one in the envelope. You haven't opened it. No. But you know what's in it. I was present when it was created. I know its general contents. And you're saying this agreement establishes majority shareholding? 51%, held through a private trust structure, created 11 years ago, prior to the company's formal incorporation under the Ashford family name, at a point when the company was still technically a technology development partnership. Patricia was quiet for a moment. You understand what happens when you open that envelope? Yes. You become, effectively, the controlling owner of a publicly recognized corporation. Everything that comes with that, the regulatory requirements, the disclosure obligations, the board restructuring, that all initiates. I know. Why did you wait 11 years? He looked at the parking structure through his window. A different pigeon this time, or maybe the same one. He couldn't tell. Because I didn't want any of it, he said. I wanted the work. I built something. I wanted it to keep running. I didn't want an office on the 38th floor or my name on the building. I just wanted it to work correctly. And now? Now someone is trying to use it to steal from itself. So I want it to stop. Okay, she said simply. I'll be available by phone. If you open that envelope in a formal context, a board meeting, a legal proceeding, I want to be reachable. Call me before you go into that room. He said he would. Clara Ashford's office on the 38th floor was the first time Ethan had been above the 22nd floor in 11 years. He stepped out of the elevator at 2:58 and stood in the reception area for a moment, adjusting. It was the kind of space that had been designed by someone with a specific idea of what power should look like when it was comfortable with itself. Clean lines, expensive materials, a view of the city that made the city look like something you owned rather than something you lived in. He had seen offices like this before. He had once been offered one. Helen, the executive assistant, walked him to the door. Walter Kingsley was already inside. He was 71 and looked it. The shoreline had weathered him pleasantly, the way that kind of life does, and he'd gotten thinner since Ethan had last seen him, and his hair had gone fully white. But he was sitting in the chair across from Clara's desk, with the complete ease of a man who had spent 40 years in rooms like this one and had stopped finding them impressive somewhere around year 12. Clara was standing by the window. She turned when Ethan came in. They looked at each other. "You know each other," she said. It wasn't a question. "Walter was the one who brought me in," Ethan said. 11 years ago. Clara looked at Walter. "You told me you'd brought in a brilliant young technical engineer whose work was going to change what the company could do. You never mentioned—" "I mentioned everything you needed to know at the time," Walter said, with the affable firmness of someone who has made peace with being difficult. Ethan wanted privacy. I respected that. The company benefited enormously from his work. No harm was done. "No harm was done," Clara repeated. Something moved across her face. Frustration, or the early edge of it. "Marcus has been on the board for 6 years. He sits in meetings I run. He has access to financial structures, acquisition strategy, personnel decisions. And you're telling me that the entire time there was a majority shareholder agreement sitting in an envelope somewhere that neither of you mentioned." "I wasn't trying to catch anyone," Ethan said. "I didn't create that structure to hold it over the company. It was created to protect the work, to make sure that if the direction ever went somewhere that would compromise what was built, there was a mechanism to course correct." He paused. "I never expected to need to use it." Clara sat down. Not gracefully. She sat the way people sit when something has taken more out of them than they were prepared to give. "Show me what you have," she said. "All of it." He spent 40 minutes walking her through it. The patent analysis, the Meridian liability structure, the Verado disbursements, the spoofed audit response, the investment position. Walter added context where he had it. 2 of the board conversations from that morning, the timeline of Marcus's expansion within the corporate structure over the past 3 years, the pattern of how certain proposals had been routed through board channels in ways that bypassed standard review. Clara listened without interrupting. She was a good listener when she wasn't in defense mode, Ethan noticed. She asked 3 precise questions at precise moments, each one landing on exactly the right gap, and he answered them directly, and she absorbed the answers without performing any reaction to them, which was harder than it sounded. When they finished, she was quiet for a moment. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "I need you not to sign anything connected to the Meridian acquisition until after the board meeting." "That's already done. I put a hold on it this morning." "I need access to the full financial record for Verado Partners, going back to the first disbursement, not just what's accessible from the technical systems level." "I can authorize that." "And I need to know who on the board is talking to Marcus." This one landed differently. She looked at Walter. "She needs to know," Walter said. Clara folded her hands on her desk. "Raymond Chu, possibly Denise Hartwell. I'm less certain about Denise. She may be listening to Raymond rather than Marcus directly." She paused. "Raymond has been Marcus's advocate since Marcus joined the board. I assumed it was professional loyalty, family dynamics." She said the last 2 words with a specific flatness that told Ethan there was a longer story there that he didn't need. "Will they listen to you?" Ethan asked. "They'll listen to evidence," Walter said. "Raymond is calculating, not sentimental. If the numbers make it clear that Marcus's play will crater the company value, Raymond will abandon it. He's not loyal to Marcus. He's loyal to his own position." "Then the board meeting is where this ends," Ethan said. Clara looked at him. "And the envelope?" He met her eyes. "At the board meeting." She absorbed this. "You understand what happens when—" "Yes," he said. "I've talked to an attorney. I understand the implications." She nodded slowly. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask." "Why didn't you want any of this? The ownership, the position? Why come here 11 years ago and build something like this and then just not claim it?" He thought about how to answer that. He thought about the way some questions sound simple and aren't, and the way some answers sound complex and also aren't. "I had a daughter," he said. "I was raising her by myself. I had work that I cared about. Those things took up everything I had. Status it's loud, it demands attention. I didn't have any attention to spare." He paused. "And honestly, I didn't trust myself with it. When you're young, and you build something that works, and people start treating you like you're exceptional, There's a version of yourself that can get very comfortable with that. I didn't want to become that version. Clara looked at him for a long time after that. He wasn't sure what she saw. He wasn't sure it mattered. 4 days, she said. 4 days, he confirmed. He picked up Lily at 5:30. She had paint on her left hand that she'd been mostly but not entirely successful at washing off, and she told him about it with the detailed specificity of someone reconstructing a scene, the color, cerulean blue. The method of application, accidental, involving a brush and a moment of inattention. The attempted cleanup, 7 paper towels, which is bad for the environment, but I was in a hurry. And the teacher's response. She said it happens to everyone, but I could tell she was a little surprised by how much. He listened to all of it. He asked appropriate follow-up questions. He was present in the way that he had learned to be present when his mind was operating on 2 separate levels. The one that was here, in the car, with his daughter, which was the level that mattered, and the one that was running calculations in the background that he couldn't turn off. At dinner, Lily looked at him over her pasta and said, "Are you going to be okay?" "Yes," he said. "Promise?" He thought about the envelope in his canvas bag. He thought about the board meeting in 4 days. He thought about Walter and Clara and Sujin and the 23 pages of documentation and what they pointed at and who was going to be in that room when it all came out. "I don't make promises I'm not sure I can keep," he told her, "but I think so. Yeah, I think I'm going to be okay." She considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "Okay," she said. And then, "Can I have more pasta?" "You can have more pasta." She served herself with the determination of someone who has been given permission and intends to use it fully, and Ethan watched her, and the kitchen was warm and the light was the particular yellow gold of an evening in late October, and he let himself sit in that for a moment without thinking about anything else at all. The next 3 days moved the way time moves when something significant is approaching, too fast in the parts where you need more of it, and too slow in the parts where you're waiting. He spent Tuesday afternoon in the finance department with authorization from Clara's office, sitting across from a different analyst, not Sujin, who needed to stay uninvolved for her own protection, reviewing the complete Verado disbursement history. What he found confirmed what he'd suspected and added a layer he hadn't anticipated. 4 of the Verado payments had been routed through a holding company called Strata Meridian Consulting, which had been incorporated 8 months before Marcus had first presented the Meridian Tech acquisition proposal. The company was named for the deal before the deal had officially been proposed. He sat with that for a moment, looking at the screen, and felt the thing he sometimes felt when a piece of information arrived that was so clean in its implications that it almost seemed too clean. A brief reflexive suspicion that he was missing something. But he wasn't missing anything. The documentation was exactly what it appeared to be. He photographed it on his personal phone and sent the images to Patricia Wren. She called back within 40 minutes. "This is a premeditation timeline," she said. "This isn't opportunism. He planned this before the acquisition was a public proposal, before it was even an internal conversation." "Yes." "When did he join the board?" 6 years ago. "And when did Strata Meridian Consulting incorporate?" 8 months before the Meridian proposal. So 5 years and 4 months after he joined the board, he builds the infrastructure for this. He waited, she said. Not with admiration, with the recognition of someone who understands what patience in service of something like this actually looks like. What's his projected gain if the acquisition goes through and the liability triggers? Depending on the investment position structure, somewhere between 30 and 50 million. A brief silence. "Ethan, this needs law enforcement involvement." After the board meeting. "I understand why you want to handle it internally first, but after the board meeting," he said again, "I need the company protected before I hand this to anyone external. If this becomes a law enforcement matter before the board acts, the acquisition gets frozen in legal limbo and the company bleeds value while it sits there. I need the board to move first." She was quiet for a moment. "You have 48 hours. "I know." He spent Wednesday building the presentation, not a slide deck. He had never in his life delivered a presentation with a slide deck, and he wasn't going to start now. He built a document, clear, sequential, precisely sourced, with every claim tied to a specific exhibit, patent filings, disbursement records, corporate registration documents, header analysis. Investment position records that Walter had obtained through channels Ethan didn't ask about. The Strata Meridian timeline. Walter came to his house Wednesday evening. They sat at the kitchen table after Lily was in bed and went through it together, and Walter added 2 items Ethan hadn't had: minutes from a board strategy session 18 months ago, at which Marcus had steered the conversation toward Meridian in a way that, reading it now with context, was clearly establishing a recorded rationale for a proposal he'd already decided to make. "He's been careful," Walter said. "Not careful enough," Ethan said. "Nobody ever is." Walter looked at the document on the table. Then he looked at the canvas bag hanging on the back of Ethan's chair. "Is the envelope in there?" "Yes." Walter nodded slowly. He had the expression of a man who has waited a long time for something and finds the waiting harder, now that the thing is almost here than it was in the middle distance. "You know what's going to happen in that room tomorrow." "I know." "It's not going to be clean." "I know." "Marcus isn't going to—" "Walter!" Ethan looked at him. "I know. I've thought about all of it. I'm not walking in there thinking it's going to be easy." Walter was quiet for a moment. Then, "Your father would have found this whole situation absolutely baffling." It surprised a short laugh out of Ethan. "Yeah, he would have. He never understood why you didn't just take the credit, run the thing." "I know." Ethan looked at his hands on the table. "He came around eventually. Before he died, yes. He did." Walter paused. "He was proud of you, Ethan. He thought you were wrong about some things, but he was proud." Ethan didn't answer for a moment. "I know," he said again, more quietly. Walter left at 9:30. Ethan cleaned up the kitchen, checked the locks, looked in on Lily. She was asleep on her side this time, one arm curled under her pillow, quiet. Not talking to anyone tonight. Just sleeping. He stood in the doorway a moment longer than usual. Then he went to his room, set the canvas bag on the floor by the bed where he could see it, and lay down in the dark. He thought about the board meeting. He thought about Clara's face when she'd asked him why he hadn't claimed any of it, and the way the answer had landed in the room with a weight he hadn't entirely intended. He thought about Marcus Ashford, who had spent 5 years building something designed to hollow out what other people had spent decades filling, and who had done it with the patient, meticulous confidence of someone who had never once considered that the thing standing in his way might be the quiet man in the faded navy jacket who parked in the 3rd row and went home to make pasta. He thought about Lily asking if he was going to be okay, and the way she had accepted his answer, and the trust that acceptance required, and what it meant to hold someone's trust and not be able to guarantee anything. He was still thinking about it when he fell asleep. The board meeting was at 10 a.m. He woke up at 5:53 before his alarm, with the absolute certainty that he was ready. Manimada Lily's lunch on autopilot, peanut butter again, because Wednesdays and Thursdays were peanut butter days by her own decree, and today was Thursday, and some things needed to stay ordinary when other things couldn't. The pretzels. He added a small note the way he sometimes did. Nothing elaborate, just a drawing of a stick figure with disproportionately large hair that was meant to be her, holding what was either a flower or a lollipop, depending on your interpretation, with the word "hi" underneath it. She had once told him these notes were embarrassing. She kept every single one in a shoebox under her bed. He knew because he'd seen it when he was putting away laundry. He had not mentioned it. He dropped her at school at 7:50. She got out, turned back once, and said, "Good luck with your people hard thing." "Thank you," he said. She nodded with the gravity of someone dispensing wisdom they've been saving and walked through the school doors. He drove to Ashford Dynamics. He parked in his usual spot. He sat in the car for 2 minutes, not thinking about anything in particular, just breathing, and then he got out and went inside. The board meeting was in the main conference suite on the 41st floor, the same room where Clara had told him to leave 4 days ago. It had been rearranged since then. The standard rectangular configuration had been replaced with a broader horseshoe, the kind used for formal proceedings, and there were name placards at each position and water pitchers and a heaviness in the air that the room's climate control system was not equipped to address. Ethan arrived at 9:40. Patricia Wren had called him at 9:15, as promised, and they had spoken for 6 minutes. He had told her he was ready. She had told him to call the moment the meeting concluded. He had said he would. Clara was already in the room when he arrived, standing near the window talking to Helen in the low, concentrated way of someone going through a final checklist. She glanced up when he came in and gave a single nod. Not warm, not cold, just acknowledgement. The acknowledgement of two people who have agreed on a plan and are both now living in the 30 seconds before it begins. Walter was there, sitting near the far end of the horseshoe in a chair that had not had a placard on it when the room was set up, but did now, because Clara had asked Helen to add one. Walter Kingsley, former chairman. Ethan sat beside him. The other board members arrived between 9:45 and 9:58, 7 in total. Raymond Chu came in with the practiced ease of a man who considers himself the most important person in most rooms, which Ethan had observed was not an uncommon characteristic in people who had been allowed to be right about that for too long. I was 64, silver-haired, and wore his authority the way certain men wear expensive watches. Not to tell time, but to tell you something about themselves. Denise Hartwell came in behind Raymond, and Ethan watched the way her eyes moved when she sat down, scanning the room, landing on Walter, sticking there a moment longer than casual. She was a careful person. He had the sense she was more uncertain than Raymond about what today was going to look like. The other 4 board members, Jerome Fitch, Andrea Kovacs, Sam Reeder, and Patricia Lowe, arranged themselves with varying degrees of visible tension. Jerome had spoken to Walter 2 days ago and was one of the ones who was listening. Andrea had called Clara directly yesterday afternoon, which Clara had mentioned. Sam and Patricia were harder to read. Marcus came in at 9:59, 1 minute before the scheduled start. He was dressed with the particular precision of someone who had prepared carefully, and his face was composed in the way of a person who has spent the past 4 days deciding that he is not worried and has almost convinced himself. He took his seat at the opposite end of the horseshoe from Walter without looking in Ethan's direction, which took effort. Ethan could see the effort. Clara called the meeting to order at 10 o'clock exactly. "I want to start by addressing an agenda change," she said. "The Meridian acquisition vote, which was originally the primary item for today, has been suspended pending a full review. The review was initiated based on new information regarding both the technical and financial structure of the proposed deal. Before we discuss next steps, I need to walk the board through what that information contains." Raymond Chu's expression shifted. He looked at Marcus. Marcus was looking at Clara. "Clara," Raymond said, with the measured authority of someone deploying a practiced register, "the acquisition timeline is already in motion. A suspension at this stage has contractual implications that—" "Raymond," Clara said, and her voice was steady in a way that Ethan could tell had cost her something to make it. "I need you to let me get through this before we discuss implications." A brief pause. "Please." The please was not a small thing. It was a specific kind of please, not deferential, but honest. Raymond absorbed it and sat back. Clara walked them through it. She had organized the information in the same sequential structure Ethan had built in his document, and she presented it with the focused clarity of someone who had spent 2 days understanding something difficult and was now obligated to make others understand it in the same room where she'd originally gotten it wrong. She did not flinch from that. He noticed the patent overlap, the liability structure, the Meridian connection to Ashford's own filings, the Verado disbursements and the spoofed audit response, the Strata Meridian consulting registration and its timeline, the investment position. She put the Strata Meridian timeline on the screen, the incorporation date against the date of the first internal Meridian discussion, against the date Marcus had joined the board, and let the room sit with it. The room sat with it. Denise Hartwell was the first person to speak. "Who controls Strata Meridian Consulting?" "We're still completing the formal trace," Clara said, "but the intermediary chain leads to a private investment vehicle registered in Delaware called Kessler Group Holdings. The beneficial owner of Kessler Group Holdings, per the registered agent disclosure, is listed as a trust. The trust administrator is a law firm in New York. We've requested disclosure through our legal team." "That could take months," Raymond said. "The trust beneficiary is listed in a supplementary filing from 14 months ago," Ethan said. Every head in the room turned toward him. Some of them had not processed that he was there until this moment. "The supplementary filing was made to update the trust's investment scope," he continued. "It's a public record. The beneficiary is Marcus Ashford." The room went completely still. Not the polite stillness of people being thoughtful. The stunned stillness of people whose internal models of reality have just been asked to do something they weren't built for. Marcus moved first. His expression had changed, not dramatically, not the cinematic collapse that movies might suggest, but in the small, precise way of someone who has just watched the structure they built reveal its own fault lines. His jaw tightened, his posture shifted. Something left his eyes that had been there a moment before. "That filing," he said, and his voice was measured in the way of someone maintaining control by focusing entirely on control, was part of a legitimate estate planning instrument. The trust's investment activities are entirely separate from— "Marcus?" Clara said. He stopped. "Don't," she said. He looked at her. She looked back at him, and Ethan thought he understood something about their relationship in that moment. The years of family history, the meetings, and the dinners, and the assumptions, and the particular accumulated weight of having believed in someone for a long time, and then being asked to look at evidence that they had not deserved it. "The investment position in Kessler Group Holdings," Ethan said, pulling the room's attention back to the documentation, "is structured to yield a significant return if Ashford Dynamics valuation drops by more than 12% in a 90-day window. That window opens the moment the Meridian acquisition closes, and Veltrin triggers the patent dispute. The drop is not a risk of the deal. It's the intended outcome of the deal." Jerome Fitch leaned forward. He was a compact, direct man who had built 2 companies before joining this board and had the specific experience of knowing what a betrayal looked like from the inside. "Are you saying he engineered the entire acquisition to short the company?" "I'm saying the documentation supports that conclusion," Ethan said. "The interpretation is the board's to make." Raymond Chu had gone quiet. It was a different quality of quiet than before. Not the quiet of a man gathering authority, but the quiet of a man doing rapid calculation. Ethan watched him and saw the moment the calculation completed. Raymond's commitment had always been to position, not to person. Walter had been right about that. "Marcus," Raymond said, and his voice had changed completely. The authority now pointed in a new direction. "I need to hear from you directly. Not through counsel, not through statements. Right now, in this room. Tell me this documentation is wrong." Marcus said nothing. The silence stretched. "Tell me it's wrong," Raymond said again, and there was something different in it this time. Not a command, but something closer to a plea, in the way of someone who has staked something on a person and is discovering the stake was misplaced. Marcus looked at the table in front of him. He was doing the same calculation as Raymond, Ethan suspected, but arriving at a different result. The calculation of someone who understands that the room has shifted completely and is now assessing damage rather than outcome. "I want legal counsel present before I respond to any specific allegations," Marcus said finally. It was in a strange way the loudest answer he could have given. Andrea Kovac said quietly, "Oh, Marcus." Clara called a 15-minute recess. It lasted 23. During that time, Marcus left the room. He was accompanied by one of the company's in-house attorneys who had been waiting in an anteroom at his request, which meant he had anticipated this, Ethan noted, which meant he had been preparing for exposure even while preparing to execute the plan. It was the behavior of someone who had built exits before they needed them, and it told Ethan that the discovery process was going to be more complex than a single board meeting could resolve. In the hallway outside the conference suite, Ethan stood with Walter and called Patricia Wren. "It's moving," he told her. He didn't deny it. He requested counsel. "Okay," she said, "that's important. Don't let the board take any votes or pass any resolutions until I've reviewed the sequence of what they propose. Call me before anything is formally moved." "Understood." He hung up. Walter was standing beside him looking out the hallway window at the city below, his hands in his jacket pockets. His expression, the particular one of a person who has been right about something for a long time and finds no satisfaction in the confirmation. "He was smarter than I expected," Walter said, "and stupider than he needed to be." "Most people are," Ethan said. "I brought him in," Walter said, 6 years ago. Clara wanted a strong development voice on the board, and I recommended Marcus because he was sharp and he understood deal structure, and I thought the family connection would keep him invested. He paused. "I was wrong about the last part." "The family connection kept him invested in the family money," Ethan said. "Not the family company. Those aren't the same thing." Walter looked at him. "No," he said. "They're not." I was quiet for a moment. "Are you going to open it in there?" Yes? Even now? Even with Marcus potentially cooperating with counsel, the deal's suspended, the board aware. The deal is suspended, not canceled, Ethan said. The board is aware, but awareness isn't resolution. Marcus has counsel and an exit strategy, and 3 days before this becomes a formal legal matter. What the company needs right now is stability, something concrete that tells the market, the employees, the board itself, that there is a structure that is intact and can hold. He looked at Walter. That's what the envelope is for. Walter nodded once, the slow nod of a man who had argued his position and accepted the answer. They went back inside. When the board reconvened, Marcus's seat was empty. His attorney had sent word through the in-house legal team that Marcus was exercising his right to suspend board participation pending independent legal review of the allegations. It was the kind of formal language that meant he was gone, and everyone in the room understood what it meant about the allegations. Raymond Chu, to his credit, did not try to rehabilitate the situation. "I'd like to formally move," he said, "that the Meridian acquisition be suspended indefinitely pending a full forensic audit of all related financial activity." "Seconded," said Jerome Fitch. The vote was unanimous. Clara moved immediately to the next item. "The forensic audit will require an independent firm with no current relationship to Ashford Dynamics. I have 3 recommendations from our legal team. I'd like the board's authorization to engage the highest rated of those firms on an expedited basis." That vote was also unanimous. "There's one more matter," Clara said. She looked at Ethan. "And I'd like Walter Kingsley to speak to it." Walter stood. He was not a man who needed height to command attention. He had the quality of stillness that some people develop when they've spent enough time in important rooms that the rooms no longer affect them. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced an envelope. Not Ethan's envelope. A different one. Smaller, official-looking, with a notary seal visible on the exterior. 11 years ago, Walter said, when I was chairman of this board, I entered into a private agreement with the engineer whose work formed the technical foundation of everything Ashford Dynamics was subsequently built upon. That agreement was created at a time when the company was in formation, and the question of how to protect the core intellectual property and the person who had created it was not a simple one. He set the envelope on the table in front of him. This is a certified copy of that agreement, held in my possession for the past 11 years and previously registered with a private trust authority. The original is in the possession of the person it concerns. He paused. Ethan. Ethan reached into his canvas bag and took out the sealed envelope. He had carried it for 4 years. He had thought about opening it more times than he could count, and had not, because Walter had said he would know when, and he had not known until now, and now he knew. He broke the seal. The document inside was 12 pages, printed on legal paper with notarized signatures on the final page, Walter's and his own, and a third from a corporate attorney who had since retired to Arizona and who Patricia Wren had confirmed was still alive and had been reached and had confirmed the document's validity 3 days ago without knowing why he was being asked. Ethan looked at it for a moment. He had not looked at it in 4 years. He had not needed to. Then he passed it to Clara. She took it with both hands. She read the first page, then the second. Around the table, the other board members were watching her with the particular focused attention of people who are trying to read a situation through another person's face because they don't yet have access to the primary source. Clara reached the final page. She looked at the signatures. She looked up at Ethan. 51%, she said. Yes, he said. She looked back at the document, back at him. Through a private trust structure established prior to the company's formal incorporation under the Ashford family charter. Yes, she set the document down on the table, which means the Ashford family founding agreement, the ones that established the family trust's controlling stake, was signed after this. 17 months after, Ethan said. The family charter established a 49% position. It was structured as a controlling stake because the agreement with me was private and not disclosed in the incorporation documents. That was by my choice. I wanted the privacy. He paused. The legal effect, however, is that the prior agreement supersedes. The room was very quiet. Raymond Chu was the first person to work through the legal implication, which Ethan had expected because Raymond was fast when he was operating in his own interest. You've been the majority owner of this company for 11 years, Raymond said, not accusingly.
factually.
with the tone of a man recalibrating a significant calculation. Yes. And you've been working in technical systems? Yes. At a fourth-floor desk. Third row from the back near the parking structure, Ethan said. The silence that followed had a different quality than any of the previous silences in the room. It was the silence of a group of people who are sitting with the distance between what they assumed and what was true, and finding that distance much larger than comfortable. Denise Hartwell said softly, "Why?" He had answered this for Clara 2 days ago. He gave Denise the shorter version. "I wanted the work. I had a daughter to raise. I didn't want what came with the rest of it, and I trusted Walter to make sure the company was run well." He paused. That trust held for a long time. "Until Marcus," Denise said. "Until Marcus," Ethan agreed. The formal resolution took another hour and 40 minutes. Patricia Wren was on the phone 3 times during breaks. The board voted to formally acknowledge the prior ownership agreement, pending full legal review. A careful, qualified resolution that stopped short of immediately restructuring the governance but established a clear record. Raymond proposed it, which surprised no one who had watched him recalibrate, and it passed 5-1, with Sam Reeder abstaining on grounds that he wanted his own attorney to review the document before he voted on anything connected to it, which was a reasonable position that Ethan had no issue with. Clara moved to initiate a formal investigation into Marcus's financial activities, including referral to external authorities, the kind of referral that, once made, could not be unmade. This vote was unanimous. Ethan did not vote on any of it. He was not technically a board member. He was the majority owner of the company, which was a different and more complicated thing. And the formal restructuring of what that meant was not something that could happen in a single morning in a conference room, and he hadn't expected it to. He sat at the horseshoe table and gave information when information was requested and answered questions when questions were asked, and otherwise stayed out of the way and let the board do what boards are supposed to do. Marcus's office on the 36th floor was quietly secured by the in-house legal team at noon, 2 hours after he had left the building. His access credentials were suspended at 12:15. These things were done without announcement, with the minimal footprint of an organization trying to manage an exposure without creating a larger one. Ethan found out about it when Helen told Clara during a break, and Clara told him, and he nodded and thought about the phone call from Richard Voss 3 nights ago. The careful reminder about contractual provisions, the threat dressed in professional language, and felt something that was not satisfaction but was adjacent to it. Not because Marcus was gone, but because the thing Marcus had built was gone, and the company was still standing. At 2:15, when the formal portions of the meeting had concluded and the board had dispersed to make their own phone calls and process their own versions of the morning, Clara found Ethan in the small anteroom adjacent to the conference suite where he had gone to call Patricia Wren with a final update. He was just hanging up when she came in. She stood in the doorway. She had loosened slightly. Not much, but in the small ways that appear in a person's posture after they've been holding something rigid for a long time, and the need to hold it has finally passed. Her jacket was still precise, but her shoulders were 2 degrees lower than they'd been at 10 o'clock. "Thank you," she said. "You don't have to thank me. This is my company too." "I know. I mean, thank you for coming to that meeting on Tuesday, for walking into a room you weren't invited to and saying what you said even though I handled it terribly. You handled it the way anyone would have handled it with the information you had. I had you removed from the room. You asked me to leave. I left. Those aren't quite the same thing." She almost smiled. Almost. "Are you going to push back on everything I say to you?" "Probably not everything," Ethan said. She leaned against the doorframe. There was a question on her face that she was taking her time getting to, which he'd observed was her pattern. She arrived at the thing she actually wanted to say through a series of other things first, a kind of triangulation. "The document," she said. "The ownership agreement. What happens now, legally, operationally? What does this mean for how the company runs?" "Nothing has to change overnight," he said. "The legal process for formalizing the governance structure will take time. During that time, the company runs exactly as it has been running, with the modifications that need to happen because of Marcus. You're still CEO. The board is still the board. The formal restructuring is a process, not an event. And you? I'll be more involved than I've been. But I don't want a corner office on 38. I don't want my name on things. I want to understand what's being built and be part of the decisions that affect whether it's built correctly. He paused. That's all I've ever wanted. She looked at him for a long moment. You know what the most disorienting thing about today was? He waited. Not Marcus. I think some part of me had been accumulating doubts about Marcus for longer than I admitted to myself. And today was the doubts arriving with evidence rather than something entirely new. She paused. The most disorienting thing was you. Sitting there in that room, in that jacket, with that folder. Knowing what you know and being what you are, and having spent 11 years being completely invisible to every person in that building, including me. She shook her head slightly. I walked past you in this building. I must have. In 11 years, I must have walked past you in the lobby or the elevator or... You did, Ethan said. Twice that I remember. Once in the main lobby about 4 years ago, and once in the cafeteria line on the second floor, maybe 2.5 years ago. You were on the phone both times. She stared at him. You remembered. You're the CEO. People tend to notice the CEO. You're the majority owner. People would have noticed you too if they'd known. Yes, he said, which is why I made sure they didn't. She absorbed this. I misjudged you. Based on nothing, really. Based on a jacket and a desk location, and an assumption that those things told me something meaningful. You're not the only person who did that, he said. It's not an unusual error. It's an error I should have been better than. He thought about how to respond to that. He thought about the fact that she had called him directly, that she had read the documentation rather than burying it, that she had stood in front of her board and walked them through evidence that implicated her own family, that she had not, when it became difficult, chosen the easier thing. You might have been, in different circumstances, he said finally, but you weren't, in these ones, and then you corrected it. That's more than a lot of people do. She looked at him steadily. Don't be generous to me just because today went the way you needed it to. I'm not, he said. I'm being accurate. A brief silence. She straightened up from the doorframe. The forensic audit firm. I'd like you involved in the selection process. Your technical background is relevant to what they'll need to examine. Okay. And the patent review. The meridian overlap, the original filings. We need to formally document the chain so that this never becomes ambiguous again. I can do that. She nodded. She started to turn, then stopped. One more thing. She reached into the inside pocket of her blazer and produced a single folded sheet of paper. She held it for a moment, then held it out to him. I wrote this Tuesday night, after our meeting. I wasn't going to give it to you until I was sure about everything, but I think I'm sure now. He took it. It was a single handwritten paragraph. He read it once. It was an acknowledgement, personal, not legal, of his role in the founding of the company's technical core. It named him specifically. It was dated Tuesday and signed with her full name. It wasn't a legal document. It couldn't restructure governance or establish rights or alter any formal record. It was just a piece of paper with true things written on it. He folded it and put it in the breast pocket of his navy jacket. Thank you, he said. She left. He stood in the anteroom for a moment by himself, in the quiet that follows the end of a thing that has taken a long time to arrive. Then he picked up his canvas bag, lighter now, without the envelope in it, and he took the elevator down 40 floors and walked through the lobby, past Priya at the reception desk, who looked up and saw something different in his face and wasn't sure what it was, and went through the turnstile and across the lobby and out through the glass doors into the October afternoon. The air was cold and clean and sharp. The parking lot stretched out in front of him in its ordinary way. Third row, far left, rusted bike rack. He had 4 hours before Lily's pickup. He sat in the car for a moment and called Soo-Jin Park. She answered on the fourth ring. The board meeting happened this morning, he said. The forensic audit is moving forward. You should know that the original anomaly report you filed has been formally entered into the investigation record. Your name is on it as the original identifying analyst. A pause. Is that going to be a problem for me? No, he said. It's going to be the opposite of a problem. You flagged something real. That matters. Another pause. Are you okay? It was the second time in a week that someone had asked him that and meant it simply. He thought about Lily asking over pasta, and the way he'd had to think before answering, and the way this time the answer came differently. "Yeah," he said. "I think I actually am." He started the car. He had work to do, calls to make, documentation to finalize, a process that was going to take months rather than days, and was going to require things from him that he hadn't had to give in a long time. He understood that. He had understood it since Tuesday morning when he had walked into a room he wasn't invited to and said what needed to be said. But right now, in this moment, there was the ordinary cold air of an October afternoon and the familiar sound of his engine turning over, and 4 hours until his daughter came through a set of school doors in a rush of released energy, and those things were enough. He pulled out of his spot, third row, far left, and drove toward the exit. The weeks that followed the board meeting were not clean. Ethan had known they wouldn't be, and he had told himself that knowing would make it easier. And he had been wrong about that in the specific way you are wrong when you understand something intellectually, and then discover that understanding and experiencing are separated by a distance that preparation cannot fully close. The forensic audit firm, Carver and Associates, the first of the 3 recommendations, retained within 48 hours of the board vote, arrived on a Monday morning with 12 people, 4 rolling cases of equipment, and the particular quiet efficiency of professionals who have done this enough times that they no longer find it remarkable. They set up in the 3rd-floor conference rooms and began pulling records, and the building's atmosphere shifted in the way that buildings shift when something significant is being done inside them that most of the people inside don't fully understand. Ethan worked with the audit team directly, not as a supervisor, as a resource. He sat with their lead analyst, a methodical woman named Grace Chu, who was no relation to Raymond and had the focused precision of someone who had spent 20 years finding things that other people had worked hard to hide. And he walked her through the technical architecture of the systems the financial records lived in, the access hierarchies, the points where data could theoretically be altered without triggering the standard logging protocols. He did this because he had built those systems, and because knowing where the walls were thinnest was the fastest way to find where someone had walked through them. Grace listened without interrupting and asked questions that went exactly to the right places. And by the end of the first full day, she looked at him across the table and said, "You're not a technical systems employee." I am technically," Ethan said. "You built this infrastructure." "Most of it. Some of the later additions were done by the engineering team." "You built the foundations." "Yes." She looked at him with the expression of someone recalibrating. "How long have you been in technical systems?" 11 years. "And before that?" "Before that, I was building what became technical systems." She absorbed this. "Okay," she said, and went back to her notes. And that was the end of it, which he appreciated. The full picture that Carver and Associates assembled over the following 3 weeks was both more complete and more damning than what Ethan had been able to piece together from accessible records alone. Marcus had not acted impulsively or opportunistically. The plan, as Grace presented it to Clara and the board in a formal finding session 5 weeks after the initial meeting, had been constructed in stages over approximately 4 years, beginning roughly 2 years after Marcus joined the board. It started with small manipulations, vendor contract adjustments that funneled modest amounts into intermediary accounts, each individual transaction small enough to fall below the threshold of automatic audit flags. He had used that period to learn the system's gaps, the review cycles, the points where oversight was thinnest. The Verado disbursements had begun in the 2nd year. Verado Partners was, as Ethan had suspected, a shell, incorporated in a state with minimal disclosure requirements, with nominee directors, and a registered agent who processed paperwork for dozens of similar structures and asked no questions that he wasn't required to ask. The money flowing into Verado had then moved through 2 additional intermediary structures before arriving at Kessler Group Holdings, which held the investment position. Strata Meridian Consulting had been the final piece, the connection point between the financial extraction and the acquisition mechanism that would trigger the payoff. Marcus had spent 8 months building the rationale for the Meridian acquisition internally before formally proposing it, seeding the idea through casual conversations and board strategy sessions, through favorable references to Meridian's technology and committee discussions, through the patient construction of a consensus that felt organic because he had built it slowly enough that nobody noticed the architecture. "It's sophisticated," Grace said, in the formal finding session, and her voice was professionally neutral in the way that people in her field learn to be when discussing things that are not neutral at all. It required a detailed understanding of the company's financial systems, its governance structure, its audit cycles, and its board dynamics. The person who designed this was not operating from outside knowledge. They were operating from years of inside access and observation. Raymond Chu, who had been a different person in board meetings since the Thursday the board meeting, said, "What's the total figure?" The confirmed extraction through Verado and its successor structures is $11.4 million over 18 months, Grace said. The projected gain from the Kessler investment position, if the Meridian acquisition had closed and the patent dispute had triggered as planned, would have been in the range of 38 to 44 million. The room was quiet, with the specific quality of people processing numbers that represent something beyond the numbers themselves. "And Marcus," Clara said, "where does the investigation stand?" "That's in the hands of the Federal Financial Crimes Unit now," Grace said. "Our findings have been formally transferred. We're available to the investigators as needed." Federal. The word sat in the room and meant what it meant. Marcus Ashford had retained a team of 4 attorneys within 24 hours of leaving the board meeting. He had not returned to the building. He had, from what Ethan understood through Clara, spent the weeks following the board meeting in a kind of public silence that was clearly professionally managed. No statements, no responses to the press inquiries that began appearing once the audit became known in the financial community, no contact with board members or company employees. He had called Clara once, 3 weeks in. She had taken the call. She told Ethan about it afterward, in the matter-of-fact way she had developed for things that were difficult, not minimizing them, but not performing them either. He said he was sorry, she said, not for what he did, for how it affected the family name. Those are not the same apology. No, Ethan agreed. He asked if there was a way to resolve it privately, to keep it out of the federal process. What did you say? I said it was already out of my hands, which is true. And then I said that even if it weren't, I wouldn't do that. She paused. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, I always thought you cared more about the name than the company. And I said, I know, you were wrong. And he hung up. She said it without drama. But Ethan heard something in it, the weight of a family story that had been running for a long time and had just reached a chapter that couldn't be revised or reframed into something more comfortable, and the particular loneliness of being the person who had to hold that. Are you okay? He asked. She looked mildly surprised that he'd asked. Then, I've been better, but I've also been worse. She paused. Ask me again in 6 months. The formal governance restructuring took 11 weeks from the date of the board meeting to complete. Patricia Wren handled it with the meticulous thoroughness that Ethan had hired her for, in coordination with the company's own legal team and an external corporate governance specialist. The prior ownership agreement was formally registered, reviewed, and validated. The trust structure was legally confirmed. The board was formally notified of the controlling stake and its implications. There were negotiations, because there are always negotiations in processes like this. Raymond Chu had concerns about the operational implications of majority ownership resting with someone outside the existing executive structure. Denise Hartwell had questions about the board's ongoing authority and how decisions would be made going forward. Sam Reeder, who had retained his own attorney throughout, came back with a detailed list of specific governance questions that Patricia addressed point by point over 2 sessions. These conversations were not easy. Ethan sat in most of them and said less than people expected, which he had learned long ago was often the most effective contribution to a negotiation. Let the other person say the thing they're afraid to say, and then address it directly, which is more useful than speaking over it. What he told the board, in the session where the formal restructuring was ratified, was this. I'm not here to run this company. I don't want to run this company. Clara's the CEO, and as far as I'm concerned, she stays the CEO for as long as she wants the job and does it well. What I want is what I've always wanted. For this company to do what it was built to do, which is create technology that actually works and treat the people who build it like they matter. I've been watching it do that for 11 years from the 4th floor. I intend to keep watching. I'll just be doing it with a clearer line of sight than I had before. Raymond looked at him for a moment after that and said, You're a very unusual person. I've heard that, Ethan said. The ratification vote was 5-1, with Sam Reeder abstaining again on grounds of ongoing personal legal review. Patricia had told Ethan this was Sam's right and was not a meaningful obstacle, and she'd been correct. Sam's attorney completed his review 2 weeks later, and Sam sent a brief email to the board confirming his acceptance of the governance structure. It was the most anticlimactic resolution to a month-long abstention that Ethan had ever witnessed. Soojin Park was formally reinstated to her original role in the financial analysis department 6 weeks after the board meeting, with a written acknowledgement from the company that her reassignment had been improper and a retroactive record correction that removed any negative notation from her employment file. She received a salary adjustment that Clara had authorized without Ethan asking for it, which told him something about Clara that he had suspected but not confirmed. He ran into Soojin in the second-floor cafeteria on a Tuesday in early December, the same table where she'd been eating soup when he'd come to talk to her 6 weeks earlier. She was eating soup again. He wasn't sure if that was habit or coincidence. "How are you doing?" he asked. "Better than 2 months ago," she said, "which is a low bar, but I'll take it." She looked at him with the direct, assessing quality he'd noticed the first time. "You didn't tell me who you were when you sat down here." "No." "Would it have changed anything if you had?" He thought about that honestly. "I don't know, possibly. People respond differently when they know they're talking to someone with power." "I would have been more scared," she said. "That's what I thought." She ate a spoonful of soup. "For what it's worth," she said, "the way you did it, sitting down with a coffee you didn't want, not telling me who you were, asking instead of demanding, it was the right way to do it." She paused. "I've thought about it a lot. Most people in your position would have come in with a title." "I didn't have a title at the time," he said. "Officially." "You know what I mean." He did. "The work doesn't care about titles," he said. "The thing that needed to be found out was true, regardless of who found it. You did the original finding. I just had a different angle on the same wall." She looked at him steadily. "You're going to be an interesting person to work for." "I'm not your boss," he said. "Clara is your boss." "Technically," she said, and almost smiled, in the same way she'd almost smiled the first time, and he suspected that was simply the register she operated in, and it suited her some. Lily found out in the way children find out things that adults have been careful about, partially, accidentally, through a combination of overheard fragments and her own considerable capacity for synthesis. It was a Sunday in mid-December. She was at the kitchen table doing a project that involved a map, several markers, and an alarming amount of glitter that Ethan had not approved the purchase of and did not know how it had entered the house. He was at the same table with his laptop, working through a governance document that needed his review before Monday morning. "Dad," she said, without looking up from the map. "Yeah." "Dolores said something yesterday." Dolores had the quality of a person who said things without fully anticipating their downstream effects, which was not a flaw so much as a feature of someone who had stopped filtering at some point in her 70s and found the experience liberating. "What did Dolores say?" he asked. "She said you own the big building." He set his laptop down. Lily was still coloring something on the map with a green marker, not looking at him, in the studied non-looking of a person who is actually watching very carefully from a different angle. "She said you own a lot of it anyway, like more than half." "That's technically accurate," Ethan said. Lily stopped coloring. She looked up at him. She had her mother's eyes, and right now they had the particular focused quality they got when she was deciding something. "So why don't we have a bigger house?" It surprised a real laugh out of him. "What?" "I'm just asking. If you own a big building, we could have a bigger house. Mitchell's house has a room just for his Legos." "We could have a bigger house," he said. "If you want that, we can talk about it." She considered the map. "Would we have to move away from Dolores?" "Dolores isn't going anywhere." "But would we move away from her?" "Not if we don't want to." She thought about this with the seriousness she applied to all logistical problems. "I don't want to," she said. Then, "But maybe a yard. We could have a yard." "We could have a yard," he agreed. She went back to the map. A minute passed. Then, "Dad?" "Yeah." "Does owning the building mean you're like the boss?" "It's more complicated than that, but sort of. In some ways." "But you still go to the same parking spot." "Yes." She absorbed this. Then she nodded once, as though it had been confirmed rather than explained. "Okay," she said, "that makes sense." And she went back to her glitter, which suggested that whatever model she had of her father had simply expanded to include this new information without requiring significant structural renovation, which was either the resilience of childhood or a specific feature of this particular child, and Ethan suspected it was the latter. He watched her for a moment. He thought about what it would mean to her growing up, the fact of what he was, the company, the ownership, all of it. He thought about the ways it might complicate things, and the ways it might not. He had not built any of it for her, but she was the reason he had stayed careful with it, stayed honest with it, stayed the person who parked in the third row because he needed to be the person who didn't need to park closer. He had been afraid for a long time of what status did to people. He had watched it happen to people he'd known, and the common feature was always that they stopped being able to see themselves from outside the frame it built around them. He did not want that for himself. He especially did not want it for her. He reached across the table and gently moved the glitter container 2 inches further from his laptop. Lily didn't look up but said, "Sorry," absently, in the tone of someone who is not very sorry but acknowledges the theoretical validity of the concern. "It's fine," he said. It was. The shareholder meeting was held in the second week of January in the main auditorium on the 40th floor, with an attendance that was larger than the company had seen at any formal meeting in several years. The financial community had been watching since the forensic audit became known. The internal employees had been watching since the day 12 people with rolling cases showed up on the third floor. Everyone, in their own way, had been waiting for the public accounting. Ethan sat in the fourth row, not the front. He wore the navy jacket because it was cold outside and it was the warmest thing he owned that was also appropriate for the occasion, which was a low bar, but he had met it. Clara presented the findings with the precision and composure of someone who had spent the past 11 weeks doing the hard work of understanding exactly what had happened and was now prepared to say it clearly. She walked through the forensic audit conclusions, the governance restructuring, the federal referral, the cancellation of the Meridian acquisition, and the operational changes that had been implemented to close the gaps that Marcus had exploited. She answered questions from shareholders directly, including 2 hostile ones from a hedge fund representative who seemed to have prepared for a different version of events and found the actual version unsatisfying, which Clara handled with the cool patience of someone who has stopped needing the room's approval to hold their ground. When she opened the floor for general questions, a shareholder near the back, an older man in a gray suit whom Ethan didn't recognize, raised his hand and asked, "Can you tell us more about the majority shareholder? The reports have been vague about who this person is and what their role will be going forward." Clara glanced toward the fourth row. Ethan stood. There was a shift in the room, the physical adjustment of a large group of people reorienting their attention to an unexpected location. "My name is Ethan Cole," he said. "I've been at Ashford Dynamics for 11 years. Until recently, I worked in technical systems on the 4th floor." He paused. "I created the original technical framework that the company's primary product portfolio is built on, and I hold a 51% stake through a prior ownership agreement dating to the company's formation." He paused again. "I'm not taking an executive role. Clara Ashford remains CEO. The board remains the board. My involvement is as a majority owner who is going to be more present than I have been, and more engaged in ensuring that what was built here continues to be built correctly." Another pause. That's it. That's the plan." The man in the gray suit said, "And the Meridian situation, are you confident it's been fully contained? The acquisition is canceled. The federal investigation is in the hands of people equipped to conduct it. The internal gaps that were exploited have been closed. The company's financial position is sound." He looked at the man directly. "No, I'm not completely confident because complete confidence in complex situations is not something I trust. But I'm confident in the people doing the work, and I'm confident in the direction. That's the honest answer." The man in the gray suit nodded slowly. "Fair enough," he said. Ethan sat back down. The person next to him, a mid-level product manager he vaguely recognized from the 6th floor, leaned over and whispered, "You're Ethan from Technical Systems." "Yes," Ethan said. "You fixed a network issue for our team once, like 4 years ago. You came up on a Saturday." "I remember," Ethan said, because he did. The product manager stared at him for a moment. Then he shook his head slightly, the way people shake their heads at something they are still in the process of integrating, and faced forward again. After the shareholder meeting, in the corridor outside the auditorium, Walter found him. He looked the same as he had in the board meeting. The white hair, the comfortable jacket, The air of a man who has deposited the appropriate weight in the appropriate places and no longer needs to carry it. He put one hand briefly on Ethan's shoulder, which for Walter was the equivalent of an extended embrace. Bernard would have been furious about Marcus, Walter said, and he would have been proud of how this ended. I don't know if it's ended, Ethan said. It's resolved. That's not the same thing. No, you're right. It's not. Walter looked around the corridor at the dispersing crowd, the shareholders moving toward the elevator banks, the employees heading back to their floors. What happens to you now? Same as before, mostly, with adjustments. Still the fourth floor? For now. There are conversations happening about a different role structure, but I'm not in a hurry. He paused. I'm going to be more involved, but I need to be involved in a way that's useful rather than decorative. That takes time to figure out. Walter nodded. You were always better at the figuring out than the announcing. Yes, that's not a criticism. I know. Walter looked at him with the particular expression of someone who has watched a person over a very long time and has arrived at something close to the end of the watching. Not an ending in any final sense, but the completion of a specific arc, the moment when a story reaches the point where it has said what it came to say. You did well, Ethan, he said simply. The work did well, Ethan said. That's what I was trying to protect. I know, but so did you. They shook hands, the way they had shaken hands 11 years ago in a different building in a different context with a very different set of facts between them, and Walter went to find his coat, and Ethan stood alone in the corridor for a moment with the auditorium emptying around him. He thought about something that had been sitting with him since the board meeting, since the moment he had broken the seal on the envelope and handed 12 pages across a table and watched the room reorganize itself around a truth it hadn't known was there. He had spent 11 years being invisible by choice, and he had told himself, had genuinely believed, that the choice was about humility, about not needing credit, about having learned from watching what status did to people. And those things were all true. But standing in this corridor with the shareholders filtering out and the shareholder meeting behind him and the work of the next months ahead of him, he could see something he hadn't quite let himself see before. That some of the invisibility had also been fear. Not fear of the position itself, but fear of becoming someone he wouldn't recognize. Fear that if he took the space he'd actually earned, something would change in him that he couldn't change back. He had watched that happen to people. He had been afraid of it for so long that the fear had become indistinguishable from principle. He was not sure, even now, that the fear had been entirely wrong. The people he'd watched it happen to had not seen it coming either, had not thought of themselves as the kind of people it would happen to. But he was also not sure it had been entirely right, because the company he'd built had been vulnerable in ways that his absence had made worse, and the people in it, Sujin, who had flagged something real and been moved like a piece on a board, Phil, who had spent 6 years managing someone he didn't understand, Priya at the front desk, who said good morning to him every day in a building whose ownership structure had been a fiction. Those people had deserved more than a majority owner who parked in the third row and let the distance between himself and the power he held become someone else's risk to absorb. He had been right not to want the crown, but he had been wrong, maybe, to act as though refusing it was the same thing as not having it. You could not hold something and pretend you didn't hold it. The holding happened regardless. The question was only what you did with it. He picked up his bag from the chair where he'd set it during the meeting. The canvas bag, the same one he'd carried into the board meeting 3 months ago, with an envelope inside it that had changed everything and was now gone, opened, witnessed, filed, formalized, absorbed into the record of things that were simply true. The bag was lighter than it had been. He noticed that every time he picked it up. He picked Lily up from school that afternoon. It was a Tuesday, which was normally Dolores's day, but he had asked Dolores if he could take this one, and Dolores had said, of course, with the particular warmth of someone who understands without being told. Lily came through the doors in her usual rush, yellow rain jacket, paper bag that rustled. She got in the car, buckled, looked at him. "How was the big meeting?" she asked. "It went well," he said. "Did you have to talk?" "A little." "Were people surprised when you talked?" He thought about the product manager from the 6th floor, the slow head shake of a person integrating something unexpected. "A little," he said again. She nodded as though this confirmed something she'd already decided. "You should talk more," she said. "You're good at it when you do it." "Thank you." I'm serious, you just don't do it very much. I'm aware. She looked out the window at the passing street. Are we going to be okay? She asked. Not in the worried way, not with the edge of a child who has sensed something frightening. In the considering way she asked things she was genuinely curious about. Yeah, he said. We're going to be okay. Because of the building stuff? Because of a lot of things, he said. The building stuff helps, but mostly because we've been okay before and I don't see a reason that changes. She thought about this. Dolores says you're the kind of person things work out for because you're not trying to make them work out. Dolores is a wise person. She also said you need a haircut. She's right about that too. Lily smiled. The full one, the one that had been her mother's and was also entirely her own, and looked back out the window, and he drove through the December streets with the particular quality of late afternoon light that turns ordinary things briefly gold, and the heat in the car was working, and his daughter was in the back seat telling him about a book she'd started about a girl who could bend rivers. And he listened to all of it, every word, because that was what the work was for. Not the building, not the stake, not the meetings in rooms 40 stories up, with people who had finally learned his name. This was what it was for. The man who never needed a crown had never really needed one because he'd always known what he was actually protecting. And what he was protecting had never once required him to announce himself to protect it. It just required him to show up, which he had done every morning for 11 years, and intended to keep doing.